TE Talks with Guides is a weekly podcast for lovers of history, travel, and all things Italian.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Through Eternity podcast Talks with the TE Guides. As I've mentioned before, I always find it a great opportunity to talk with fellow guides whenever we have a time to meet when we're not working around giving tours. And then I thought always to myself that it would be just fascinating to be able to give an opportunity for people to hear what we chat about, because, you know, a lot of us are really passionate about so many different aspects of Italy and the places that we have the golden opportunity to show people around. And I just thought that would be really interesting for people who have done tours with us in the past. And I think it's great to give a taste for people who will be coming to see us in the future. Now, I've reached out to so many different guides, and today we have Caterina doing a discussion with us. And I'm so excited about this because she brought up something that I kind of wax poetic about. I love to show examples to people, just a snippet of it when I'm walking around the Palatine Hill, for example. It's just, they're wondrous things, this kind of decorative art form of ancient Rome. But before we get into the Opus Sectile, which is what it's referred to, I'd like to just say hello to Caterina. Ciao.
Hi, Rob. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Hello. This is great to have you here. I'm so excited about this because, I mean, it's so funny because you and I have never really talked about it. But, you know, I mean, you've been a guide for a long time. But when I studied for the guide exam, I just kind of fell in love with Opus Sectile. But let's talk a little bit about you first. So how long have you been a guide and how long have you been working with Through Eternity Tours?
Okay, I'm a guide since 2009, so that means a million years, more or less.
11, yeah.
With Through Eternity for another million years, which is about, I think I started in 2010, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, so it's been about, this is your 10th anniversary with us.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, yes. You know, when we find the gold, we want to stick with it. So we work really hard to have really great relationships with you guys. And a lot of our guides have worked with us for a long time. It's lovely to hear. Now, your specialty is art history, correct?
I'm an art historian, yes, and I studied in Rome. Mm-hmm. I spent most of my life in Rome, actually. I studied at the Roma Tre University, art history. Mm-hmm. And my thesis was actually on women artists and in the 1600s, who they were, where they came from, how come they became artists. Turned out they either were all nuns or daughters, sisters, wives of artists. Anyways, so I've been studying art for my whole life almost, I would say. Art history, rather.
Well, you know, those are wonderful subjects. You know, it's, you know, wouldn't it be great? I was talking with Thomas because he said, oh, what 7 tours can I show you about the Middle Ages? You know, if we could do these specialized tours, you know, with female artists in the 1600s, it's actually a kind of a famous, fascinating discussion that we could do in another time. But, you know, it's something that we could even, with the ability to present now online, we could definitely do these kind of specialized experiences for people.
Absolutely in. I can't wait.
You know, I mean, with this kind of movements about rights for women and how even today there's so much kind of struggle going on, and then we can even look back and see that it was very much the struggle going on 600 years ago. Of course, I'm talking about Artemisia Gentileschi, but like we can leave that for another time. But,
yeah, absolutely. Lots of funny stories about them too, actually.
Yes, lots of funny, lots of fun, lots of fascinating, probably shocking stories as well. You know, I also want to point out something, you know, as Caterina was saying, you know, that she's an art historian, or we have historians or architects, the thing, or archaeologists. You know, I myself am a guide because I have a fascination with history, and I passed the test because it's a really tough test to pass. You know, we all have different aspects, but it doesn't mean we're just specialized in one thing. It doesn't mean we're just specialized in just art history or just one other thing. But getting on to the argument of today. So,
artists, they were not just painters or just sculptors or just architects. They were a little bit of everything. the
Absolutely,
Renaissance.
that's a very valid point. They were Renaissance, let's say people, not just Renaissance men, right? Renaissance people, these artists. And yeah, well, there's just tons of stuff like, were they even considering themselves artists? The struggling artist was never something I thought that Michelangelo ever felt himself as like a poor struggling artist. But anyway, get on to Opus Sectile because it's such a great subject. You know, I find that people look at it. Well, let's just tell people what it is.
Well, Opus Sectile is it's an inlaid marble decoration. It's not mosaic. It's similar to mosaic, though. In fact, Opus Sectile, I found an English term for that, which is Florentine mosaic, that actually refers to Opus Sectile in the 1500s in Florence, all these flowers, and we'll get into that at some point.
Yeah.
What makes it different from mosaic is that the pieces of marble that are used to create compositions, they are not the same size. They're not all square or so, or very small. They are of different sizes and also kinds of marble, because the great point, the core point of Opus Sectile decoration is that it's done with colored marbles. Everybody thinks of marble as something white, and marble is white. The most precious marbles are white, although also there's millions of kinds of white, if we want to talk about it. But the Romans considered marble every stone that could be polished and made shiny, every stone that had an interesting pattern or color. So Roman marbles, this is a historical sort of definition, but ancient Roman marbles are colored. They can be purple or green, yellow, black, pink, anything possible, or they can have very interesting pattern on the surface. I'm thinking of alabaster from Egypt. I'm thinking of marmo cipollino, which we all know so well, no? The onion marble, no? And the Romans at some point started to use this decoration, which is, it's not a Roman decoration, it's way more ancient than that. In fact, it's Vitruvius that tells us that a king in Asia Minor, whose name was Mausolo, the mausoleum of Halicarnassus.
Oh, okay, great.
He was the first.
Mm-hmm.
He was the first king to have his palace decorated with colored marble slabs.
Mm-hmm.
Later, other kings in Asia Minor, basically the officers of Alexander the Great, once he passed away and left his enormous empire to his officers, basically the diacons, basically, they became kings of smaller portions of Alexander's empire. And one of them in Asia Minor, his name was Menander. He had that's what Pliny tells us, that he had his palace decorated with Opus Sectile decoration.
Great. So I mean, just sorry to interrupt, but to clarify for people, so we're talking about 4th century BC, right? Okay, so Alexander the Great dies, and he has spread the Greek culture, the Macedonian culture throughout Asia Minor, and we're talking about not just using Halicarnassus is using mausoleos of Halicarnassus. He was using colored marbles, but we're talking about this other king of Alexander the Great who is taking the colored marbles and actually creating images with it, you know, decorative figures of pieces of stone that we kind of refer to as inlaid today.
Probably geometrical abstract compositions, because figures that's a Roman thing.
Sure.
Sort of, that's actually a kind of a late Roman thing, but we don't really know, because all we have is written sources. But what we can imagine would be something geometrical, something abstract, no? However, emphasizing, no? The point of Opus Sectile decoration is to emphasize the colors of the marbles and the varieties of stone. So the matches, the pairings, happen according to that. Okay?
Sure.
And there was use of marble and probably also Opus Sectile decoration also in Egypt, talking about Ptolemaic Egypt. So Cleopatra and her dynasty. Cleopatra, what an interesting woman, right? Cleopatra that teaches the Romans how to be sophisticated and classy, you know?
Yeah.
She introduces the concept of luxury in Roman society on a large scale, let's say. And when she comes to Rome, she brings to Rome a series of poets and artists, and apparently Cleopatra and Caesar were fond of Opus Sectile decorations. When they moved around, they moved the whole decoration with them, actually. That's what Pliny tells us. I think it's hilarious somehow. And Rome starts to know to use marble for decoration. I'm talking about decorating floors and walls, indoor decoration, not outdoor decoration. That's something important. Opus Sectile is an indoor decoration.
Absolutely.
The symbol of luxury, the symbol of magnificence. Already in Roman times, Pliny is absolutely shocked about Opus Sectile decoration. He thinks that's a bad custom, imported, a barbarian custom, not in line with the Roman values, no? Tough, sober life, this kind of thing.
Stoic life. Yes, I mean, isn't that often that they were criticized, especially a political move against Cleopatra when first she was with Julius Caesar, but then, of course, with Mark Antony, is that they were too exotic and extravagant with their luxury.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. And although the very first Roman that Opus Sectile for the decoration of his home was none of these famous people. It was an officer of Julius Caesar called Mamurra that apparently was the very first one that started this fashion in Rome. But this fashion became the thing to do for Roman patricians, and even also later, because this is a technique that survived the centuries, no? And let's also say, marble, the Mediterranean area in general is incredibly rich still to this day. For what concerns me. There were quarries everywhere in Egypt, in Libya, in Tunisia, in Greece, in Turkey, in Italy. And marble was shipped to Rome.
Sure, it was. It was used architecturally for construction, columns, pediments, everything all over the place. But what was the advantage was that in the interior, they were much more protected. They were buffed and shined and polished, and they were brilliant. I guess, what I want to try to emphasize with people, because they're listening to us talk, we're going to have a recording of this, and I'm going to try technologically to share some of the images that you've shared with me, sent to me. But guys, when you come to Rome, and as Caterina was saying, everybody who had the money and the power to do this started to decorate their homes, and we fortunately have examples of it. And if you see them on the Palatine Hill, where the emperor's palaces were, we have preserved pieces, and they are just brilliant. The colors are shocking how beautiful. They almost seem like something that could have been done in modern times, right?
Absolutely. I'm thinking of certain floors that you can see also at the Capitoline museums or at this.
Well, then those are the ones that we can start to get into the images, which I was thinking about, because I'm just like, I'm hankering to start talking about the animals being displayed or the charioteers. I mean, they're just mind-blowing to me. They're just really, really beautiful. But I always remember in the forum itself, in the Curia, when you take people to have an opportunity to see the reconstructed Opus Sectile floor of a building that dates back to 306 AD is amazing. And nowadays the door is shut, but sometimes we're lucky enough when we're going through, I get people to sit down all over and take a look at it, because it's just so beautiful, the geometric decoration of the Opus Sectile.
Yes, and as we said, Opus Sectile decoration, today what mostly survives are the floors, no?
Yeah.
And also say how where the name comes from and what the technique was about. How did the Roman craftsmen do opus sectile? Now they call them sectilia, those decorations, and the word sectilia comes from secare, to saw. They would saw the marble with blades, yes, into very thin slabs actually, and they would create a sort of pattern on a small kind of panel, and then they would repeat this pattern in series. This is what we see, for example, on floors. It's always the same pattern that is repeated and repeated and repeated, no? Which is normally geometrical, as we said, or anyways abstract. And they would, Opus Sectile works a little bit like mosaic in the sense that it's the composition happens in reverse. What does that mean? You have a working table, okay, and you start putting the pieces together. You have the drawing right underneath, but you're working on the back side of the composition.
Okay.
You will now fill all the little fields with the right kind of pieces, following a drawing or something, and then once you're done, you put a mixture of well, today it's not anymore done like that. I'm describing the ancient technique. Well, the craftsmen would use a mixture of terracotta fragments and quick drying mortar, and they would put it on the surface they just had composed. And once this was dry, this created a sort of base. Now the composition, you could kind of put it upside down, and on the other side, that would be the side that you would see, okay?
So it kind of reminds you of the tapestries, when they make the tapestries, how they would always flip them over.
Yeah, tapestries, mosaic, that's all techniques that have to keep in mind that you are working in reverse. You're working basically on the side that won't be seen at the end, because that's the side that goes on the floor. On the floor there will be a thick layer of plaster on which this opus sectile will stick. And also some metal clamps will help fix the decoration on the floor. By the way, the use of metal clamps also dates back to the Egyptians. It's the techniques to work marble, to process marble, changed very little over the centuries, actually.
You know, what I'm probably going to try to do, Caterina, just bearing with me, just because you said like the first type that we're trying to mention is this decoration for the floors and walls. And you brought me an image that I think, if I'm not mistaken, was it like a 3D recreation of the Palatine Hill or even the Domus Transitorium? Let me take a look at it.
Yes.
Let's see if this will work. Okay, so try not everyone to look because I have to focus it out. This right over here. Can you guys see that? Okay, let's look. Let me enlarge it. Here we go. So as we're seeing right here, we're talking about these beautiful floors. Now, is this of the Palatine Hill or?
No, this is the Palatine Hill. Yes, yeah. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think also they have kind of a part of it unearthed on part of the Palatine Hill. I remember this part of the floor was very beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, great. Sorry to interrupt you on your floor, but I mean, everyone could see then what it must have been like for people. And what's great about the Opus Sectile is because it still is so brilliant today when you go through and see it. Lots of times we're walking through, it's a bit dusty in areas, but if we can get inside the museums, like the Capitoline, where no one else ever goes to, we can see some of this kind of stuff. So it's a painstaking, costly labor to do. Right. And, we talked about certain things you wanted to say, like who were the people that, this is the technique that they used. What was it like to create something like that? What kind of time did it take?
Well, you have to consider that artists have been working in teamworks, in workshops since antiquity. So what we see, it's not the work of one person. It's the work of a team. That was probably the workshop. Probably some predefined models existed already and were used over and over and over again by the same workshop. And probably there were specialized artists that had specific tasks. We don't really know because little, very, very little has survived of the, I mean, the artists and craftsmen in general, and unfortunately, they did not enjoy a high consideration in Roman society. Cicero defines them as the dreck of Roman society, and the reason is a very ancient reason. They work with their hands like the slaves.
So
And
that skill to work with your hands, and even though they consider that, we would say great talent today, it's considered the dregs of society. They work with their hands like the slaves. Well, there we go. Fascinating.
although we know they had corporations, probably corporations were born in ancient Rome, and they exist since the monarchy time, since 6th century BC, actually. And actually, an ancient historian, I think it's Varro, that tells us that at the time of the Romans and the Sabines, they didn't want to mix together. So one of the early kings, Numa Pompilius, he created collegia, which we could translate as corporations, basically groups of professions that gathered people from various origins, but people that shared particular interests. And this is how corporations are born, professional corporations. And obviously artists had their own. And in Republican age, they were private and pretty independent. But at the time of Caesar and Pompey, they start to take sides. They start to get political. I'm talking about craftsmen in general, obviously. But the artists, the ones that they realized the Opus Sectile, they were part of this world, no? And also we can imagine this, we don't know for sure, but we can imagine that these corporations also started to fight for rights, civil rights for
unions, maybe?
Which is part of the reason of the negative reputation that they had. In fact, in imperial age, corporations will be strictly regulated by the emperors, and the profession you will be able to transfer the profession only from father to son by law. But that's imperial age. However, things were also a little different because artists could also be itinerant. Artists are itinerant. Being an artist means also to be itinerant because you go where the work is, where the patronage is, where there are wealthy clients that can afford Opus Sectile decoration, for example. No? So the idea is that the craftsmen or the very first ones were Greek or Egyptian, and they had been imported to Rome, like a lot of other things, like the marble itself. And there is this movement from east towards the west. Now the Greek world that sort of civilizes the Roman world. That will continue for forever. The flow will be inverted only with the creation of Constantinople. Once Constantinople is born, it's the Roman artists that will go to Constantinople to embellish the city, actually.
That's really interesting to bring that up because I always try to talk about it in my tours. I mean, I've always kind of interpreted it that, the Greeks were this highly artistic, philosophical society that eventually got taken over by what they looked at as a bunch of farmers, a bunch of, as the Italians would say, burini, But in the same time, the Romans understood that. They wanted the culture, they wanted the artwork, they wanted these skilled craftsmen. They brought them over. It's kind of like the nouveau riche coming in with a bunch of money, and yet at the same time, they looked down on them. They looked down on them, they conquered them, they have a higher level, even though, the wealthy families wanted to have a Greek scholar, a teacher teach their children to speak Greek, but they still were slaves. It's just kind of fascinating. I mean, in all aspects. They were the ones who brought the Greek sculptors to do statues because they were the ones who had the money to say, okay, give me some marble statues of these Greek bronze that we all want. They were doing this for the Opus Sectile as well.
Absolutely. And there were parties. They were the ones in love with Greek culture that always recognized the superiority of the Greek culture. On my tours, I always say to my clients, guys, in your tours, you'll hear a lot about the Greeks and the Romans. So let's get this straight. What is the relationship? And I always say the relationship is the Greeks invented everything that we know, and the Romans developed and applied on a larger scale somehow what the Greeks invented. Now, the foundation of Roman society is for a great part Greek culture. That's absolutely, that's a matter of fact, especially in imperial age, in Republican age, things are de facto a little different. In Republican age, which means when there were no emperors yet, there were parties, conservative parties of people like Cicero, saying, or like Cato the Censor, saying that Roman values had to be defended, and all this luxury, all this excess was the reason of the decadence of Roman society.
Go ahead, sorry.
What I also think is particularly interesting is that when we read Pliny and his description of Opus Sectile decoration, he also develops a theme which for the time is absolutely non-expected. He thinks the pouring of marble is not environment friendly because you're exercising a violence on nature, and he thinks earthquakes are the punishment of the gods because of violating nature with the pouring of marble. And I think that's absolutely hilarious somehow, no?
I mean, could you then call him the first environmentalist, I guess?
Absolutely. It's a matter of fact. But he is actually the one that gives us most information about Opus Sectile in written sources, but he complains about it. He thinks that's one of the reasons of the decadence of Roman painting, because there's also a strong relationship, and there always will be, with painting.
Sure, there is, and I would imagine, I mean, for people to come inside these homes, it was just such a difference because there were other types of decoration that they had. They could have used frescoes. We also talk about mosaics. The Romans used them more on the floors, and the churches later on used them in the higher up levels. And the mosaics were small pieces as opposed to the Opus Sectile. What I would say is that these homes, I mean, yes, we can see them, and we're going to look at some on the level of the emperor and his palace. But later on, this is where we get to start in the 4th century AD, in the 300s, right? It was we have some examples of them, and they're quite fantastic. Junius Bassus, not only did he have a family with a great sarcophagus that we all had to study that's in the Vatican, but it was this room of this home that was near what we would say today in Santa Maria Maggiore. So the pieces of it are in the Capitoline museums, I think some of them at least. What do you think it was? When was the transition of the Opus Sectile, when it becomes, as you're saying, painting as opposed to just geometric, abstract, decorative forms?
Well, it's a gradual transformation, I would say. It's not abrupt, no? And also there are examples of fresco painting that imitates the Opus Sectile, because probably the owner of that house was wealthy, but not wealthy enough to afford real marble. I'm thinking of the Case Romane.
Exactly.
Exactly. There is a relationship between the two, that painting and Opus Sectile continue to dialogue over, I would say, 200 years, and probably it's in the 3rd century with Severus that we start to see the first figures. 3rd and 4th century. The 4th century AD is the peak of Opus Sectile in ancient times, in Roman times, because you start to see the first human figure hunting scenes, human figures portraits in Opus Sectile. For example, there are beautiful hunting scenes with a tiger chasing. I think it's a lamb. Now these beautiful panels that you can see at the Capitolini Museum, which comes from this Basilica of Junius Bassus, which you were referring to.
Yeah, I'm going to try to share it with us right now. Let's see if I get successful or not. Here we could see some of the beautiful floors, but let's try to go through. Here is the room. This is the room of Junius Bassus right here that we can see. And when you guys take a look, you can also on our YouTube channel see what we're videotaping of this conversations with me and Caterina. We could see on the upper left-hand side, and we'll get a closer look at it, but like a tiger and a hunt scene killing a deer. And over on the right, they have lions that are now on display. This is a recreation, this room, I believe. This is not the famous room in the medieval museum from Ostia. This is the Junius Bassus room, if I'm not mistaken, right? Caterina?
Yes, no, actually, this is the medieval museum from Ostia. This is Eur.
Okay, this is Eur. Okay.
But they look very alike.
They look very, very similar. Okay, guys, so just what you can see about this room blew my mind. I know I'm saying that a lot, but you cannot understand. It's in the medieval museum in Eur, just not because it has anything to do really with the Middle Ages, but it was found in Ostia, which was at that time a luxury port town, a kind of vacation area for the wealthy at that time. And they rediscovered it and they brought it into the medieval museum because the medieval museum was the only one that had the space for such a large room. And it's so wonderful because there's no one who ever really goes to that museum, unfortunately, but fortunate for you to walk into this room. It's beautifully lit with the backgrounds all in black. It's just stunning. But we can go through, this is some of the stuff that was on the floors of the Palatine Hill, the palaces. There's another example, which for me is just unbelievable. Yeah, we saw that already. Here is some of the hunting scenes. Now, this is from Junius Bassus, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's actually a tiger chasing a cow.
There we go.
Anyways, it's a hunting scene now, and that's all of it. Look at the tiger. Each black stripe of the tiger is made of different kinds of marble. Look at also the chiaroscuro, the shadows.
Sure.
With pieces of marble. This is amazing. The soil, no, the earth on which those two animals stand. Junius Bassus was an amazing place that unfortunately no longer survives today. Only pieces of this magnificent domus can be seen, not anymore the entire complex, because unfortunately, it endured the marble pillage that Rome experienced over the centuries. But there's something funny about it. Since one of the sometimes the binder for these different marble pieces were natural resins, that during the 16th and the 17th centuries, the monks of the nearby monastery of St. Anthony, they tried to recover those resins. So they destroyed literally pieces of Opus Sectile decoration of the Junius Bassus Basilica to recover these resins and sell them as a medication against flu and diarrhea. Can you believe that?
No. Well, I mean, hey, we're talking today about putting Clorox into our blood system to purify us by a head of state in the United States, but we won't get too political. But yeah, those kinds of things happen, right? Well, they just didn't have the culture. They didn't care. For us, it's just shocking to hear about it. But I mean, when you guys take a look at this, or if you look on your own, the thing I think that makes Opus Sectile so amazing is that it is so vibrant. To me, it almost seems, because so many things in the ancient world seem old. They don't seem dusty, but they just seem of another world. These seem almost like moving pictures in some ways to me because they are so vibrant and the details are so specific for them. To the claws, as you said, with the chiaroscuro, the shadowing work on it. the teats of the tigress, because it really is a tigress. You can see them as she's killing these bulls, which are usually sacrificial animals. They're just amazing. Okay, I'm sorry to jump ahead, but I've always loved this rite as well. This is also in the Capitoline Museums. And this is showing for us, and I've always spoke about this when I talk about the Circus Maximus, because it talks about the charioteers that participated in the games and the races. And I always said that they have the 4 teams based on colors, right? The red team, the white team, the green team, and the blue team. All colors that are always important to the Italian flag and the azzurri, the soccer team.
Absolutely. Yeah, still Junior Basso though. Although you see the eyes on the figures get a little larger,
Yeah.
which is one of the things that tells you we are in 4th century AD. That's typical of that kind of period. And we'll find it again in the Byzantine art, which is actually the art of the Eastern Roman Empire. And while this technique was almost forgotten in the Western world after, in the West, what would have been the Western Roman Empire, after the fall of it, there will be a significant recovery of Opus Sectile only in 12th century AD, actually. In the Eastern world, in the Eastern Roman Empire, in Constantinople, this technique never died out. And in fact, Middle Ages are very, very long time, full of wars and controversies among the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and the popes. That all lasted centuries.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, all this comes to an end. I'm cutting a very long story short.
Yeah.
And in 12th century, they reached an agreement, the Pope of the time and the Holy Roman Empire. And after this agreement, which basically is established it's called the Treaty of Worms or Concordat of Worms, which is 1122 or 1123. What matters to our story is that in Rome, the big commissions start again. The popes start again to invest in the decorations of the churches, such as St. Peter's Basilica, that gets a new Opus Sectile floor in the 12th century. As Scola Cantorum, which is this square element at the center of an aisle, like San Clemente, where the choir was hosted. What is interesting in the Middle Ages is that Opus Sectile is no longer used just for floors or walls, but it's used to decorate altars or pulpits or candlesticks or marble benches of some sort. Anyways, the architectonical elements of a church, of the inside of a church. It makes the church itself more precious somehow. And the very first example in the Middle Ages of Opus Sectile that we have in Latium after a very long time was the floor of the Monte Cassino Abbey, which unfortunately we don't have anymore because Monte Cassino was bombed in 1944.
Mm-hmm.
But this was the very first original floor, and therefore not a copy, important commission therefore, realized in the surroundings of Rome, Monte Cassino Abbey. And what is also very interesting is that the Abate Desiderio, which was the monk in chief, let's say, he called craftsmen from Constantinople to do.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, you brought it up and I didn't underline it, but it is very important. You talked about the Greek artisans then coming to Rome, but then later on, as Constantine creates the new capital of the Roman Empire, which would eventually become the capital of what was known as the Byzantine Empire, was Constantinople, today's Istanbul. And it's great to see the similarities between them when you go to places that were once ancient temples, then churches, and now mosques, like Hagia Sophia, or even changed to museums. You say now that they're being brought back, the artisans from Constantinople, eventually back to Rome, which is, as you said, they're itinerant. They go from one place to the other, kind of like a circus crew, wherever the work is, wherever they're going to be paid, or actors or anybody, but that's what you have. So they're going through. Now,
and the cosmos were these in marble inlayers, these craftsmen that were famous from the 12th century until the 15th centuries. In fact, they gave a name to a kind of floor, the cosmatesque floor, which is the floor of a typical medieval church in Rome, now with this geometric circular pattern, which probably were related also to the liturgy of Mass. No,
yes. I've read that.
Probably they were the generations after, I mean, the generations after the students that had learned from these artists of Constantinople
So
that
the
had done
descendants of the people. That's great.
and you can see, exactly, you can see the cosmatesque floors in the Sistine Chapel, in the Raphael rooms, because this kind of floor survives until the 1500s.
Yes, absolutely. San Clemente, so many churches in Rome. You can see these magnificent floors. That's so funny. I never realized that because I always refer to them as cosmatesque floors, but of course they're Opus Sectile. And I never knew that the sectile from seccare is from sawing, which is also fascinating. I always love to point out things in Rome, how so many things are connected to the ancient world. And here again, you've shown me again one of these different paths. So thank you very much for that. I never realized that. See, guys, this is the great joy that I have, is that I get to talk to all the guides and I get to steal their knowledge. This is what you learn, so much because we know so much, but we can share ideas with each other and everyone's kind of interpretations of things and bring it back. So getting back to that, through the Middle Ages, but then you also, in some of these wonderful images that you sent to me, and you just mentioned that you see the reference that the English call Opus Sectile Florentine mosaics, right? We get it getting brought back into the Renaissance time, right?
Exactly. In the Renaissance time, now in the 1500s, let's be a little more precise. In the 1500s, when Rome becomes again an important city that has something to say, also under an artistical point of view, the Roman marbles, the ancient marbles that were stripped away from the monuments, no? These color marbles start to become famous and known in the courts of Europe. And the Roman craftsmen start to realize furniture elements such as large tables with the Opus Sectile on the top, with ancient Roman marbles. So that's the variation in the 1500s. And obviously the Medici want these marbles as well. And they sent Giorgio Vasari to Rome to find the pieces of marble with which they could do this precious furniture pieces. But these marbles were very, very difficult they were getting rare. They already started to get rare in the second half of the 1500s. So the Grand Dukes of the Medici family, they founded a manufacture, a sort of royal workshop called Manifattura Granducale, so the Grand Ducal manufacture of Florentine mosaic, which is nothing else but another variation of Opus Sectile, which has magnificent results. So the Medici manufacture was created by Ferdinando Medici, who was the son of Cosimo I and brother of Francesco. Cosimo and Francesco had been thinking about it, but they hadn't made it. They had passed away before. Ferdinando decides to fund the Manifattura in 1588 because he has this very, very ambitious project of a chapel, the Chapel of the Princes in San Lorenzo, in Florence, the Church of San Lorenzo.
The Medici tombs are, right? Okay.
It's full of the Medici tombs are in the Church of San Lorenzo in Florence, in various chapels. The Chapel of the Principi, of the Princes, therefore, is entirely decorated in Opus Sectile.
Wow, I've never seen that.
By the Manifattura Granducale, actually. And the purpose of this magnificence is that they wanted to steal the relics of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem and bring them there. That project never succeeded, but that was apparently the reason. Anyways, it's a splendor. However, what's the difference with the Roman marbles? It's not marble anymore. It's semi-precious stones, like lapis or agates or chalcedony, sapphires, other kinds of gems, and it's more figurative.
Okay.
Being realized it's always big tables, no, but with still life or a fantasy of flowers and shells or butterflies, parrots, rare plants, not because the interests of some members of the Medici family, such as Francesco, were alchemic. So yeah.
Wow.
This is why the stones were easier to find, and they could come from all over the world. And artists we know that the first craftsmen that had a skill in working with these stones came from Milan. But the artists, the painters, because again, in the Medici manufacture, there is this very close relationship between painters and marble craftsmen, because they work together. The painters realize the compositions, then having in mind now the colors of the semi-precious stones, and then the craftsmen that do the opus sectile, they are very accurate in finding exact that kind of color they try to be as accurate as possible in, in translating the painting into a marble, not marble, that's inaccurate, into an opus sectile decoration with semi-precious stones. And the result is amazing. Exactly, that's exactly what I'm talking about. No, the background is always black. Normally those are Egyptian stones like basanite, for example. But look at the flowers and look at the dry leaves or at the feathers of this bird. Now there is a very high attention in making this as accurate as possible, and also very, very, very the principle of opus sectile, emphasizing the colors, is kept. No.
Yes. It's like you almost see the light would shine on the feather wings by the choices of stone that they used. It almost seems like some of them are like a mother of pearl in some aspects. It's quite fascinating.
And not only tables were realized like that, but also, for example, this is a table of the 1800s. The previous one was 1600s production.
Yeah.
But also cabinets or tobacco tins, or that's a masterpiece. For example, that's a typical 1600 composition. Now this explosion, this is almost a Baroque table, no? And
Flowers.
Way more figurative, and this kind of artifacts were incredibly popular in the 15 and in the 1600s among the Italian courts, but not only. And important architects such as Vasari, Vignola, Zucchi, important famous artists that did also, churches and palaces, they also engaged in this kind of projects. You can see in these projects how drawing had become important in Italian art. No?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's interesting that you brought these up. I don't remember seeing them in Florence as much. What I remember seeing things like this example that we're looking at here is a tabletop with fruits, garlands of flowers all in bloom with four corners. We had the family coat of arms of, I think it's fleur-de-lis. I'm not sure if it's the Farnese family or not. And then birds recreated. It makes me think of the ancient House of Opus. But I would see things like this in Sicily. I've seen a lot of the beautiful inlay altars inside the church, which you don't see that much in Rome, for example.
Well, the reason is that at some point, the Medici family extinguished in the 1700s.
Sure.
And other courts of other kingdoms made very fabulous offers to these artists. Mm-hmm. Some of them emigrated to Naples, to Sicily, but also, for example, there were manufacturers of this kind in France, the Gobelins in the 1600s. They take inspiration of the Grand Ducal manufacture, or also the the Praguese manufacture founded by Rudolf II. Yeah, this is the Medici coat of arms, entirely Opus Sectile. And what makes it different from the Roman Opus Sectile? It's more figurative, obviously. It's not marble, or not always marble. It's more mixed. And it's more international. You know, Roman products of the 1500s. I'm not talking about the ones realized in the antique. I'm talking about the tables you see in Villa Borghese, for example, Galleria Borghese. And consider a lot of Roman private collections are still not open to the public, but there are, I'm sure, several of these tables at the Galleria Farnese, for example.
Sure, absolutely. You know, I was thinking, not to put you on the spot as we're going to be wrapping this up because one could take through, I would always just urge for everyone, especially when they go travel, to go and see this in Rome, because again, these are magnificent pieces that we can see. They're these little treasures. Where else do you think, aside, I know where to find them in Rome, the ancient ones. And now, thanks to you, I know where to find some in Florence as well. Are there other museums that you know of? I was wondering if the Art History Museum in Vienna has them, or do you know of anything off the top of your head, any museums that may have pieces?
Well, in England, in the UK, some private collections. In Westminster, some of the royal tombs of the Middle Ages were decorated by the Cosmatesque, actually. But my recommendation will always be the Museo dell'Opificio delle Pietre Dure in Florence, which is one of the most important restoration institutions on earth, actually. And this technique survives to this day because it needs to be restored. So the craftsmen that know how to do Opus Sectile still exist, actually, because they restore the ancient pieces.
Well, that's so great. That's wonderful, guys. And since we're going to be throwing this out on social media platforms that say like podcasts, and then also we're going to have this on our YouTube channel, we would love for you, fans of history, if you do have other areas where you think that there are you're pretty sure of, that you know where Opus Sectile can be found, send us some information, send us some photographs. And Caterina, please often let us, thank you again for this. And we can provide for them anything. You mentioned that you had just read a book up about this. That's why you're excited to talk about it, which is what I love to do. I love, when I read a new book, people often ask, Rob, what's your favorite place to talk about in Rome? And I say, well, whatever depends on the most recent book that I've read. Oh my God, there's new stuff to talk about, a new point of view, a new way to look at something. Which is great. Another thing I forgot to mention about you, Caterina, a specialty, is that you are half German and half Italian, so you speak both languages quite well. So if anybody's listening, Caterina loves to give tours in German too. As opposed to also having impeccable English. But thank you again so much for this. It has been a great joy to be able to talk to you about all of this. And I'm so glad, because really, Opus Sectile is something that I get very excited about. I do on the Palatine Hill. I get very excited about it because they have a little example of it outside. But I mean, it's just like, if the doors of the Curia are open, if I ever get to stroll around in the Capitoline museums, I just love Opus Sectile.
Yeah, take it away. And that's a geek pleasure. No, we're geeks, so we have to share this.
We're geeks. We're geeks of the ancient world. I'm geeks of the modern world. I often make references of Star Trek and comics and all that kind of stuff. But yes, we are geeks. We are geeks in the end. But anyway, guys, and also Caterina and I will be, Caterina will be doing a virtual tour of Caravaggio. So you guys are welcome to join that as well. We'll be selling those on the website through Eternity with the virtual tours also. Thanks again, Caterina. I look forward to speaking to you soon. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to our TE Talks with Guides. We have a new episode every Wednesday. Please subscribe to get an alert when each podcast comes out. Rate us and tell people how you enjoyed it, and share it on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Most importantly, if you enjoyed it, send us a feedback about the show. Also, if you are curious about what some of these people and places we talked about look like, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch the video on this podcast where we have inserted special images for you to further enjoy the story.